What's going on, guys? Thanks so much for visiting my channel. If you're new here, welcome. If you're a reoccurring visitor, welcome back. Today, just as the title suggests, I'm going to give you the top 5 things that I wish I knew when I started YouTube and filmmaking and videography and editing and all these things that are entailed in the videography YouTube space. So let's get started. Okay guys, so we are going to talk about the top 5 things that I wish I knew, top secret things, everything that I wish I knew when I started filmmaking and YouTube. But before that, I have an announcement to make. That announcement is that today is my birthday. It is October 2nd. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm sure that you can take a wild guess. Put it in the comments below and give me some birthday likes if you want to give me something. Give me some birthday likes. So the first tip I want to talk about is regarding frame rates. And frame rates are really important whenever you start filming, because what you want to do is make sure that your frame rates are designed for the specific effect that you're going for. For example, 120 frames is going to be more ideal and more specified towards slow motion, because whenever you get into the actual video editing software, you can slow it down to like 20% of the actual speed, and it'll actually look buttery smooth as you're doing some kind of action, whatever it is, B-roll, what have you. 120 frames per second is good for B-roll, but not good for filming just normal everyday stuff, because what ends up happening is you're going to lose some frames, because obviously you're doing 120 frames per second, and what you're putting in your timeline is 24 frames per second, because your timeline on whatever editing software you should be using is going to be 24 frames per second. 24 frames per second because that is the most cinematic look you're going to be able to get, and quality-wise, it looks the best and the easiest on the eye, especially in 4K or 1080p, what have you. So number 1 is going to be frame rates. Another important thing about frame rates is if your camera is set to PAL, you're only going to be able to get like 30 or 60 frames per second, whereas if you set it to NTSC, then you will be able to get it into 24 frames per second. So make sure that your camera is set up to do that specifically in 24 frames per second. And I'm going to go ahead and do a quick top down and show you the difference between the two cameras, both Sony and Canon, 2 cameras that I have, and I'll kind of show you where to change the frame rates, and then also show you on a phone if you're filming with a phone. And just take a quick note, this is under option 1 under the camera setting under movie record quality. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do with your camera is you always want to make sure that it's turned to like this camera mode, especially on the point and shoot. It's like really important to make sure that that setting is set to the camera. So here you have a Canon menu system, and this is where you would set the frame rates. Don't worry about setting the exposure, but the frame rates you can change to 4K or 1080p, just depending on what you're looking to do, but try to keep it at 24 frames per second if that option is available, 23.98 or 976, etc. You can also enable high speed or 120 frames per second by turning on the high speed or high frame rate option. The other option under the little wrench icon, you go to the 3rd menu and you can change it under video system to NTSC or PAL. And not to get too technical, but you don't want to choose PAL, you want to choose NTSC, because that's going to allow you to get 24 frames per second. Now I'm going to show you how to do it on an iPhone. You want to first switch it to video mode, and then in the upper right hand corner you can change it from HD, which is 1080p, to 4K, 24 frames per second. You do not have a 24 frames per second in 1080p, it is only available under 4K. But also Android phones, they do have a similar system. There's like a little drop down menu. It just has to be the right camera that has that support for the 24 frames per second. But yeah, as you can see, 1080p, it only has 30 or 60 frames per second. And then obviously your slow motion in the camera is going to be like your 120 frames per second. So now moving over to the Sony PowerShot, you can first of all make sure again the top little icon is changed to your cinematic or your videography mode, and then from there you should be able to hunt down and track the frame rate option, which is going to be under the second little camera icon at the top, and then you can change the file format to 4K or HD. I left it at HD so you can see like 120 frames per second under the record setting, or 24 frames per second as well, and that's going to be all shot at 1080p under the record setting menu. Last but not least, I want to show you under a little luggage icon at the top, you can go down to the NTSC PAL selector, and if you don't have 24 frames per second, this is where you would switch it from PAL to NTSC. Mine's already in NTSC, so I don't have to do anything. So another thing you might ask is why those frame rates? Why 24 frames? 24 frames, again, the most realistic look, and it actually allows you to blur out things in motion. Which is good. It's a more desirable effect. 120 frames per second is going to remove all that motion blur out of there, and it's going to look really bad if you put it in a 24 frames per second timeline. So why 120 frames per second versus like 60? Well, 24 frames evenly divides into 120 frames per second. I believe it's by, again, 20%, 5 times. It'll divide out. So it's perfect if you want to do some slow motion at 20% speed rather than filming at 60 frames per second, allowing your editing software to compensate for the lack of evenly dividable frames. So before we get into the editing software, I do want to talk about panning speeds and the actual motion in which you can. Since we are talking about frames per second, it's also important to know like how slow or fast you should actually turn the camera. I'm going to provide a link in the description below. It's Red's website. This is something I wish I knew when I first started out. So this website can be used to match up your focal length, your frame rate, and the panning angle to get a duration of how long it should take for you to pan throughout the shot to get your most desired effect. Again, if you're going to be doing panning motions, likely you're going to want to do it in 24 frames per second. In order to do it in 24 frames per second accurately without any type of motion blur that's undesired, use this website. It's a great tool, it's a great resource to be able to get a perfect shot. I mean, really, there's no question about it. Now, another thing I want to talk about is camera selection. You can use your cell phone, you can use a point and shoot, or whatever camera that is available to you at the time. Make sure to use 24 frames per second at 1080p or 4K if you're going to be uploading to YouTube. But 1080p is just fine, to be honest, and a lot of videos are still uploaded today in 1080p just for the simple fact that the file size is smaller, it's much faster to edit in most editing softwares, and it doesn't require a lot of higher-end video editing hardware such as an advanced graphics card or what have you. So just know that these little small point and shoot cameras, this is a Canon G7X Mark III. This is the Sony RX100 Mark V. I use a wide variety of cameras for whatever shots that I'm trying to get, but the most important thing to remember is use the best thing that's available to you at the time, and don't focus too much on the actual camera specs as much as you focus on getting the actual video shot, because you don't want to spend months and months trying to find a camera whenever you could be spending months and months getting better at filming and get, more experience. Another thing, lenses. So these point and shoot cameras, they have lenses that are built in and fixed, but they have a variable zoom, which is still really good. I mean, I think that most of these go from like 15 to 70 millimeters, right? If you're gonna buy a lens, if you have to fork out the cash to get one, if you're just using it for vlogging, 15 to 35, anywhere in that range is gonna be good enough. It's gonna allow you to punch in close, but also get a lot of wide angle shots, which is more than enough just to get started. There's some cameras out there that have some really inexpensive lenses, so just make sure you choose the right one that's going to be able to get your face in the frame whenever you hold it at arm's length away. That's the most important thing. You don't want to get a lens that zooms in on your face and you can't even hold it while you're vlogging. Because a lot of vlogging you're going to find is handheld. If you want to kind of change things up, that's the best way to do it. Another thing, if you're looking to do a lot of outdoor filmography, which everyone is eventually going to film outside, I would either purchase an ND filter for your camera if it's a bigger camera, or if you are buying one of these little point and shoots, just make sure that it has a built-in ND that you can turn on and turn off, because what that's going to allow you to do is cut out some of the light to prevent you from getting overexposed shots whenever you're filming outside. One thing I wish I knew whenever I knew that. We talked frame rates, we talked panning speed, we talked lens lengths, like the actual millimeters. We talked about ND filters. We're also going to talk about gimbals. So a lot of people want to buy gimbals, and honestly for me, that was the last thing I bought. I bought a drone before I even bought a gimbal, I'm pretty sure. A gimbal is great. It's a great tool to use, but it's mostly a very cumbersome thing that you have to deal with, getting it balanced, balancing your camera. If you're trying to just get some shots really quickly, this is going to be like at least a 10 to 15 minute process. So whatever you're filming, just make sure that you absolutely need a gimbal before you invest money in it. And let me tell you something else. The first gimbal that I ever owned was for a GoPro. It was actually like a gimbal designed for the GoPro. I think it was Tech or something like that. My whole entire first video sequence, my first montage video that I uploaded to YouTube was filmed entirely on a GoPro in the linear setting at 1080p using a gimbal. And that's back in the day whenever the GoPro, I think it was the 5 or 6, they didn't have great video stabilization built in, and I wasn't gonna do it in post because I wasn't that experienced and I didn't really have the computer hardware to do so. But what I want to say though is that the gimbal did give me some really shake-free footage for the whole entire thing. It was a great investment then. Today GoPros, their actual built-in stabilization is so good that you probably don't even need a gimbal. With the iPhone 11 Pro, at least, I don't know about the other ones, but the stabilization after you actually record, if you shake it a little bit and then like walk around with it and then save your video, it automatically stabilizes the shot, so it looks really good. It doesn't look bad at all. So again, you probably don't need a gimbal. I would save it for last. The only reason why I would ever recommend buying a gimbal is if you're trying to get a lot of running shots, like literally running, or if you are, you know, a more advanced filmographer who's like trying to film like a movie or something that requires literally no camera shake. So speaking of editing and post-production basically means like when you're editing your video software inside of an application, for example, Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, or Adobe Premiere Pro, which is what I use currently. And I will say a couple quick things. You know, I started using Final Cut Pro and I switched to Adobe Premiere. I wish I would have probably just stuck with Adobe Premiere before I even got invested into Final Cut Pro. But let me tell you a couple of things that I liked about Final Cut Pro that I dislike about Adobe Premiere, and vice versa. Final Cut Pro, which is only designed to run on the Macintosh OS as a proprietary video editing program, is 100% free after you buy it. So you don't have to pay a reoccurring subscription like you do with Adobe Premiere. That's a huge drawback because when I bought my laptop, my MacBook Pro, I wanted to just have a one-time purchase and not pay every month, and I was 100% cool with that. What I started to find out is that the actual Mac didn't have enough storage, and I had a terabyte of storage on the actual MacBook Pro. It didn't have enough storage to be able to maintain all the 4K footage that I was dumping on it. And the problem is that once you start editing videos on a MacBook Pro using Final Cut Pro, your project size is like constantly growing for whatever video you're editing. So if you have more than like 3 or 4 or 5 hours of 4K footage, there's a large chance that 5 hours of 4K footage is going to end up taking, you know, 700-800 gigs, and before you know it, your hard drive's full and you're dumping things on external, you're buying faster external media to be able to edit off of, and it's a whole headache of problems. So again, this is my experience with Final Cut Pro, and I changed in 2019, so things might have changed since then for the better. Don't hold me to, you know, all of this stuff again. This is, you know, me not using it for over 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. So yeah, a couple of the key things, it's a one-time purchase, but it only works on Mac, which is you know, kind of a downside, because if you're trying to collaborate with other people in the future, you're only gonna be able to share projects with people who are running Final Cut Pro. Whereas Adobe Premiere works both on Windows and Mac, which makes it a much more suitable solution if you're going to have other people edit your video or contribute to your project. So again, the things that I loved about Final Cut Pro is, for one, the transitions were super easy to integrate. The whole entire interface was really easy to use once you got used to it, and a relatively low learning curve. Another great thing is the stabilization is really easy to implement, whereas in Adobe Premiere, I find that like the warp stabilizer doesn't work as good as what I experienced using Final Cut Pro. Another cool thing about using Final Cut Pro is that using LUTs and color grading, I found was extremely easy in Final Cut Pro, but rather cumbersome using Adobe Premiere. And that's, again, my experience. But I remember you could download these little like packages, these little things that directly integrated, and I'll link it in the description below as I find out what it was called. But you can easily buy these add-ons that integrate directly with Final Cut Pro, so you can color grade or kind of change the look and feel of all of your footage with a simple mouse click. You don't have to film in S-Log, you could film in regular, but if you do film in S-Log, I'm sure it would probably look a little bit better. But the cool thing is that whenever I was using that software, Final Cut Pro, it was really easy for me to just change the color and correct colors and make things more vibrant. Whereas in Adobe Premiere, I struggle with that, and it's really hard to like get the best quality out of your existing shot footage. So the other two things I was gonna say about Final Cut Pro is that, again, it is really easy to use. It was very low, it had a very low learning curve, but the worst thing that I found about Final Cut Pro that absolutely drove me crazy is I think they use this thing called a Mocha engine or Mocha, something like that, but it was the tracking. If I wanted to track some text in the scene, kind of similar to how I did in my last video, which was kind of like the text was stuck to like the Jumeirah Hotel, that is really, really hard for me to do in Final Cut Pro. It might be easier for other people, but in my experience, it was really, really complicated to get it to work correctly, and I ended up giving up on it several times. Super frustrating. But Adobe Premiere is great at that. So we'll go ahead and jump into Adobe Premiere and we'll talk a little bit about that software. I think that we kind of know the whole history if you watch my old videos of when I switched to Final Cut Pro and why I did it. And I remember like Casey Neistat was actually switching, and there was a content creator, her name is Atola Visuals. She was the one that kind of put me on to Adobe Premiere by telling us how she switched from Final Cut Pro to Adobe Premiere, and whenever I started watching the video and then saw how easy it was to kind of set up the same layout and the terms that they use like slicing and cutting and ripple delete, all those things that are kind of new to a person who was using Final Cut Pro, after I watched her video, it made a lot more sense, and it was much easier for me to kind of just pick up and I just referenced all the videos that she put in the description of her video, and it really helped me out and kind of fast-tracked me to learning Final Cut Pro. And I'm gonna go ahead and drop some of those videos. I did save those. Those are great videos if you are just now starting out, if you're just now starting in Final Cut Pro, and you wanna switch to Adobe Premiere, or if you are just starting fresh and you wanna know what software to use and you want to try Adobe Premiere, definitely try checking these videos out because they're great resources if you want to learn how to edit faster. And let's be honest, when you're talking about editing and you're talking about investing your time, the amount of time that it takes for you to edit is crucial. You want it to be as fast as possible so that you can get more videos out and get back to filming. The more time you spend behind the computer, the more you're going to have neck problems, the more your back is going to be out of line, and the more angry you're gonna be at just everything, including life. You're just gonna be mad. Just like, I hate being in front of the computer all day, editing the same footage for 4 hours, because I don't know the hotkeys, I don't know what to click, I don't know all these things. Anyways, you get the idea. So both of these applications support 24 frames per second timelines, and that's the next thing I wanted to mention, is that you do wanna make sure that your timeline matches up with 24 frames per second, because again, if you're putting in 4K, it doesn't matter, 24 frames per second. Each software can downscale and upscale. It doesn't matter if you want to film it in 4K or 1080p and then up convert it or down convert it. Do whatever you want. Just, I would recommend sticking to 1080p for both filming and editing, at least if you're starting out, especially if you don't have a higher end computer that can handle all the graphic intensive stuff that is going on behind the scenes whenever it's encoding or decoding or like rendering all the video footage. It's really, really taxing on your computer. So just make sure that if you're starting out and you don't really care about like the higher end quality stuff, go with 1080p. But make sure that you're using a 24 frames per second timeline, and again, your camera set to 24 frames per second. And I'll go ahead and show you real quick how to set up a 24 frames per second timeline in both Adobe Premiere and Final Cut Pro. In Adobe Premiere, if you want to create a new sequence, you just right click on the little Project Explorer, click on New Item, Sequence, and then you can choose what other frame rate you want. Alternatively, if you have footage already in your project, you can just drag and drop it onto the timeline, and then it'll automatically create a sequence on the left-hand side. You can right click on that sequence and then go to Sequence Settings, and here's where you can adjust the frame rate and the frame size. Right now it's set to 23.976, which is pretty much the 24 frame standard that everyone uses. So make sure you use this. It's definitely better. 1920 by 1080 or 4K, whatever it is that you're specifically shooting. It is best that your sequence settings do match up to whatever footage you're using. So again, if you're shooting 4K, you can use, if you want to get the best optimal quality, use 4K in your timeline. for the sequence, or if you're using 1080p from your camera, then use 1080p. But again, like I mentioned before, it'll downscale and upscale to whatever you decide to set the sequence setting to. Alright, real quickly, I just wanted to show you how to do this on Final Cut Pro, because we already just did Adobe Premiere. So whenever you create the new project itself, I'm going to call this one test, you have the option here to choose 4K or 1080p, and then you can also choose the frame rate, which 23.98 is what you're going to want to use. So creating this project, if I dropped content or a video or anything on that timeline, so I dropped this video, this is like Deadpool, just a movie I had on my computer. I just dropped it on here, and what you can do if you ever want to change the sequence settings, second panel at the top, you would click on your project, and then you would click on modify, and then that's going to again bring up the options to change the resolution if you want to like downsize it to 1080p from 4K, and then it'll go ahead and do that conversion for you. But yeah, that's how you do it in Final Cut Pro. Again, at the end of the day, it's complete user preference. Everyone has their own things that they like about each one, but for me, Adobe Premiere is what I use. I don't know if I finished talking about my Adobe Premiere experience, but 3D tracking is awesome. Motion tracking is really good in Adobe Premiere as well, and the video editing process, once you get used to it, is pretty fast. The other cool thing is render times, to my experience at least, because you can have beefier hardware on like a Windows computer versus like a Mac, you can render things out a lot faster, which again saves you time, which is your most valuable and precious resource. So consider using Adobe Premiere for those reasons. It is cross-platform compatible, which means it works on both Windows and Mac, and again, people who are remote or not even close to you, you have a much higher chance of them being able to edit your video footage no matter what kind of computer they have. If they're familiar with Adobe Premiere, they're going to be able to edit your video, which is great. It's easy for collaboration, and because of that, my favorite video editing software. It is harder to color grade and it is harder to add transitions, but I am finding that there are some transition packs out there that you can buy, similar to the same thing in Final Cut Pro. So for all those Adobe Premiere lovers that are like, oh wow, I can't believe you said that Adobe or Premiere doesn't have easy to integrate transitions or easy to integrate color grading software, etc. Trust me, I haven't explored every avenue. I do not know everything about the software, but what I will tell you is from my experience, it was so easy to color grade and end up getting transitions in Final Cut Pro, whereas Adobe Premiere, for the time that I have invested in it, it hasn't been a very easy thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the last thing that I want to talk about. So the next thing I want to talk about is YouTube. First of all, there's a lot of videos out there, and there's some key things that you can do to make your videos stand apart. And one of the things that I'm doing in this video is giving you 5 tips, 5 free bits of information, and this actually ends up being a little bit more than 5 tips, as you probably have realized by now. But the big thing is that if you provide your early videos with a lot of detailed information that are going to benefit and add value to other people that are viewing, you're going to get more viewership, and you're going to be probably getting a lot more subscribers, which is why I've been reluctant to do it, because I hate subscribers. Don't want any of them, just never liked them. I'm kidding. If you're new here and you're not subscribed and you found any of this information beneficial, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and I'd greatly appreciate it. And then we'll go ahead and make more videos like this so that you have it in the future. But yeah, so again, back to what I was initially going to say is, if you're making new videos, make sure you use something that has either a catchy title or is really going to be beneficial or add value to someone who's actually watching. That's going to increase your viewership and increase your watch time, increase your exposure, and give you more subscribers, which are going to help in the whole entire YouTube career that you are kind of embarking on. But if you're just doing it for fun, it doesn't really matter. I would just highly recommend that if you want people to watch your videos, to use a good title that's going to add value to their time. And don't make a video that's going to mislead or clickbait people into watching a video, because then they're just going to leave and it's going to end up hurting your numbers in the future. So first of all, YouTube has like built-in AI. It automatically scans your video for a lot of different things, and there's a video I'll link in the description below that also talks about all the cool things that it does. That helps boost your video viewership. It also grabs your the text. It automatically creates captions, which I'm sure that you've seen before in the, you know, kind of like the bottom area. So it's going to automatically, using the artificial intelligence, track and suggest your video to other viewers who think that it might like your content. So there's no reason to spend a whole lot of time adding a bunch of hashtags. I used to do that back in the day, but there's no reason to invest a whole lot of time adding hashtags at the very bottom of your video so that you are more, you know, easily searched or found. Because what I found is that through some of the research that I've done is that the artificial intelligence handles a lot of that stuff. It'll suggest your video to people who have similar interests, and so you don't have to spend all that extra time tagging it and writing out a huge description or all that stuff. Like, sure, it could help, but the time investment versus reward is going to be absolutely minimal. So just understand that YouTube has all that stuff built in now, and you really don't have to do a whole lot of extra stuff to kind of market your video. If it's a great video and it's got great content, it's going to make it out to the masses. Oh, one of the last things I want to talk about is probably the most important thing here, and that is the time of day that you upload the video. There are times that are better to upload your video than others, and it's important that you pay very close attention to what time of day you are posting your video, because if you want it to pop off and get a lot of views, it's better to post it at a time where other people are watching YouTube, so that way your video will get suggested to other individuals and it kind of snowballs into getting more subscribers and more viewership. So it is important to make sure you know what time you're going to upload. And the last most important advice that I would give you, which I haven't even followed myself, is to be as consistent as possible. 2 to 3 times a week if you can, 1 time a week at the minimum, until you start building yourself up and getting known in the YouTube community. It is important. So do not upload more than 1 video per day. You're not really going to see a great return on your investment of time there. And do not post or upload your video during the least watch times, like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. You're not going to get a lot of viewership, at least not in the United States. So make sure you upload your video at a good time, and just Google that. Google is your friend. It is going to help you determine what time per your time zone to actually post your video and get the most viewership. Well, that about wraps it up, guys. I hope it wasn't too boring. There was a lot of information in there. I really hope you enjoyed this though, and if you did, consider subscribing. If you're new here, thanks for your time. And if you're not new here, welcome back, and thanks so much for your time. I do appreciate it, and I hope this video helped you out. And yeah, let me know if you found anything more insightful, and if you would like to know anything more about what I know about YouTube and video editing, etc. Make sure to drop it in the comments below, and I will get back to you and let you know as much as I can about whatever topic it is that you're interested to know about. Okay guys, thanks so much. See you later. And happy birthday to me. 1, 2, 3.